Hi there, Ollie Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. This is a podcast where we talk about being a real human being, tapping into our realness by finding a connection to wholeness by any means necessary. That sounds dramatic, and it is. It was. Today's interview, because today's episode is an interview episode, is with Laura G from lauragyoga.com. We're talking about all kinds of my favorite topics. We're talking about Kundalini. We're talking about yoga. We're talking about nervous system regulation. We're talking about healing. We're talking about what we can do to put ourselves back on the path that we belong on. So I'm not going to say too much, but this is an awesome interview. Laura, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your knowledge and wisdom about all this stuff. And everybody else, hope this helps you to go out there and live that real life. Here we go. Thanks a bunch. Boom. Oh, hi there, Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Creative Status. I discovered you and your work when I was looking on Udemy for interesting things to learn about. I typed in Kundalini and I found a course that you'd made. It was amazing, so I thought I'd reach out to you. And ultimately, we're kind of going to talk about modern Kundalini, some of the misconceptions that people have, what we can learn from Kundalini in relation to our own healing and all that kind of stuff. But before we get into it, do you feel like introducing yourself, telling people what you're all about, how you got into Kundalini in the first place, and also what you want to get out of this conversation that we're about to have?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me and, sharing information about what Kundalini is. That's a big part of what my mission is right now, to basically share the practices of yoga in a way that supports people's healing and personal development. And that's the kind of the cornerstone of what we think of as yoga therapy. So I'm a yoga teacher, but I'm also a yoga therapist. And that means that I work with all of the different tools and techniques of yoga to really support people wherever they are in their healing process or in their personal development journey. Mm-hmm. And over the years of practicing all sorts of different types of yoga, Kundalini has been one that stood out because it is so powerful at creating an experience of transformation. We think of it as taking a certain type of energy that might be there, a heaviness or a stuckness, and transforming that into something that is powerful and usable so that you can start to move in the direction that you are really working toward in your life. So that's what really drew me into Kundalini. I had a very personal experience with that in terms of my own healing and development that it really continues to be a big part of today. And it's so important to me to be able to share that with people in a way that feels like it just becomes a part of your day-to-day life and a tool that you can use to feel really engaged with what's happening all around you.
Yeah. So when you say that you do yoga therapy as well, what other kind of tools and techniques do you bring into the equation? Just to get a kind of overview of what it is you do. Because obviously a lot of people think that yoga is just about the poses or the asana. But in the Yoga Sutras, there's only 3 sutras that refer to the asana. So do you use the philosophy as well, or what else are you kind of talking about?
Yes. It's a very individual process. So, in the West, we're quite used to seeing yoga shared in a group context. There's usually a big class. And I think for most Western yoga teachers, the bigger the class, the better. Yeah. So with yoga therapy, we move it in the opposite direction. So it's either very small group or even more often it's one-on-one to focus completely on the needs of that individual and kind of getting to know where they're at, what they're struggling with, what they're moving toward. And then my part in that process is to say, okay, here are the practices of yoga. Here are the philosophies and the kind of frameworks that we have in yoga that can support you exactly where you are and to facilitate that healing process, which of course yoga is so good at. Anytime we get to interact with yoga, it will usually touch a piece of that healing process within us. So it's really a holistic process. It can involve postures. It can involve, I tend to lean quite a bit into breath work and meditation because interacts so strongly with the nervous system. And that's kind of the focal point of a lot of the work that I've done is helping people to manage their nervous system. And I just find that to be so helpful in that process, giving them those tools. But it is a very individual experience. So every person who comes to yoga therapy, the session's going to look a little bit different because it's so important that that is tailored.
That's awesome, because everybody's healing journey is different, obviously, even though it's all kind of leading back to the same place, I think. That place being just wholeness and connection and all that kind of stuff. And I love how you mentioned breathwork and meditation. For me, in all the work I do these days, I think the holy trinity, so to speak, is yoga asana, meditation, and pranayama. Like, all of those things together are just so powerful, and it does come down to the nervous system, which I think we're going to get into in a minute. So thank you for sharing that. Before we get into the deeper stuff, can you, if you don't mind, can you explain exactly what you define Kundalini as being? So one of the reasons I like your work so much is that you've made it very practical and it's very down to earth. And that kind of goes against the grain of a lot of the stuff that's out there when it comes to Kundalini, which kind of focuses on a sort of romanticization of what Kundalini is. So there's the idea that, there's a coiled snake at the bottom of the spine, and then it shoots up your chakras and you release all these different rainbow colors, and then you get superpowers, and then all of your problems are solved. You can walk on water and everything. Is that, is there some truth in that? Or how do you define Kundalini, I guess?
Yeah, well, perhaps. I don't know. I haven't gotten to that point yet where I've had any rainbows come out of any interesting places. But, who knows? Who knows? There's a whole lifetime of practice that I have ahead of me. So I'll let you know. But, my personal approach to really anything, whether it's yoga in a vinyasa practice, whether it is yoga therapy or Kundalini, I'm always trying to approach that from a place where it makes it very practical for the people who are interacting with it, because we can go with all of these different esoteric things and these really lofty goals of reaching enlightenment and that sort of thing, but if we don't have the tools to engage well in relationship that we're in right now, or to navigate our work life, or to go through these very practical things on a daily basis, I feel like we're missing such an important part of what the healing process is, to feel really engaged and connected with your life as it's unfolding. And my experience coming into Kundalini, after even practicing, many years of vinyasa, very flowy, breath-based practice where one pose flows into the next, and there was a wonderful softness with that, and I felt like it helped tremendously to feel more connected and aware of the body. But for me, when I started to get to a point in my life where some really bigger struggles than I had ever faced before started to come up with, I was in a tremendously pressured job in healthcare, and I was going through a very difficult and complex divorce. So within that time, I started to feel like my vinyasa practice was not helping me as much as it had been, because the feelings that I was going through were just so big, and I didn't really have a way to process through them. And that was when Kundalini started to kind of step forward within my personal practice. And I started to, do these movements that felt so strange. And just, when you first start doing that, you kind of feel a little bit ridiculous. You're like, what am I doing? But if there's some part of you that's like, well, let me try, maybe it's helpful. And that's kind of where I was at. Like, I needed something, and I was willing to step completely out of my comfort zone to try to find that something. And what I found was the components of Kundalini offer you an experience of both incredible power. So movements that are really strong and effortful, whatever anger, whatever, repressed feelings you feel like you need to find a way to process and to work through, it gives you a way to move in a powerful way that really helps to process that. So that was so helpful for me. In the landscape of yoga, I think sometimes the emotions of like anger and sadness are kind of avoided or not talked about, but it's such a human thing. And when we don't have the tools to process those and they start to build up inside of us, it can really have some very detrimental effects. So that really strong, powerful component of Kundalini practice hit a point for me and for many other people that doesn't really get incorporated into some of the other practices. So that's the one piece. But then the other piece that makes this practice so amazing is that you'll jump right from powerful movement, like very energy-based, body-based, powerful movement, right into stillness.
Wow.
And you watch that transition of, can I completely let that go? Can I drop all of that effort and just let myself sit here in a complete state of awareness? Whatever comes up can come up, and I'm just going to be here with it. So to me, that connection of powerful movement and engagement of the body balanced with stillness and deep awareness, which is my favorite way to describe Kundalini, that yoga of awareness. That is what makes this practice so special and so very helpful in a really practical way for anybody who's on this human journey and they have big feelings that they just don't know what to do with. It gives you some day-to-day tools that you can work with. So very helpful.
Like, it sounds awesome. So if I'm totally honest, like, I do yoga every day, but most of the yoga that I do is power yoga or vinyasa yoga or yin yoga as well. But based on what you're saying, it's actually kind of aligned with what I've experienced. So vinyasa and yin have both really helped me to like dissolve a lot of my emotional stuff. But it's come as a very kind of almost passive byproduct of going through those yoga flows. If I understand what you're saying correctly, it's almost like with the Kundalini yoga, you know that you have certain emotional stuff bubbling away already. So sadness or anger or whatever it is. And certain asana within the Kundalini context allow you to actively kind of bring those to the surface. It's almost like you're stirring up the waters intentionally. And then once it's stirred up, then you get into the stillness and you can just kind of face whatever it is and allow it to do whatever it needs to do. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah, that's the process that's unfolding over and over and over in this practice. And I always like to tell people, I love all the different forms of yoga. They all bring something different. They all, can help us with different things at certain points in our life and whatever kind of internal processes are going on. So I think they all have an important role to play. And we get to choose, do I need a yin practice today? Do I need a vinyasa practice? Or do I need a Kundalini practice to let those things bubble up to the surface? And you're actually going through this process of saying, with a certain movement, we might be like very powerfully moving the arms back and forth like you're punching. And the teacher's role is to say, okay, lean into that experience of anger. Don't move away from it. Let it come up to the surface. Let it be there. Let your body process through it and show it how it can release. And then bring yourself into that place of then soothing and settling, coming back to a state of peace. So you don't feel like it's too overwhelming. You don't feel like you get stuck in anger. You let it become this really fluid process where things can evolve. And when they're ready to let go, they know exactly where they can release. So that process can be so helpful in purposely bringing those things up that we will tend to lean away from or want to avoid because they can be so difficult to manage. But once you have that tool set and you know how the process works, you become more confident in that process, saying, okay, I'm not going to ignore my anger anymore. I'm going to acknowledge that it's there. I'm going to let my awareness rest on that and go, okay, I'm angry. And that's part of being human. Let me be with this. Let me process through this. And here's the roadmap of how to do that.
Like often when people are talking about Kundalini, like when I talk to like other Kundalini instructors and stuff, they often seem to call Kundalini a technology. Is that linked to what we're talking about now? Like ultimately it's a technology for basically managing this kind of emotional stuff that's normally just, hidden beneath the surface in the shadow self, almost.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a really common term that is used in the Kundalini practices. I tend to like to talk about the components as like tools or techniques, but I think it's all kind of getting at the same point, that we have this set of practices. And one of the other particularly interesting things about Kundalini is it's a very holistic practice. So, in vinyasa, you might do an opening breath, you might go through some flow poses, and you might do a breath at the end, depending on the class, but it's usually kind of segmented a little bit more, where in Kundalini, all throughout the practice, you could be doing a posture, you could be doing a flow, you could stop in stillness and do a meditation, you would jump right into mantra, and it's all woven together. So you take kind of all the tools of yoga and bring them into that practice. So you have these choices to work with. And that's one of the really important things that I like to highlight for the direction that some of the modern yoga teachers are kind of moving Kundalini in, is a very choice-based practice to get at that process that I see as the core of any yoga, but I'll specifically talk about it in terms of Kundalini, and that's listening to your inner information. And it's almost like a little mini conversation with yourself over and over of, how do I feel? What do I need? And then listening for that information to bubble up, and then having the courage to act on what that information tells you. And we go through that process over and over and over again. So in that listening to yourself, that's where you get to step into that place of choice of, well, do I want to continue this movement, or do I need to rest because my shoulder's getting sore? Do I need to do this very strong, powerful breath of fire? Or maybe today I need to be a little softer with myself, and I'm going to choose to stay with a slower, deeper breath because that's what I really feel like I need. So there you have these tools, these choices, all these different components that come together that craft the practice that is exactly what you need to support yourself on that particular day.
And I suppose this is where maybe the conversation comes onto the idea of awareness. So in my coaching practice, I always start the process by just raising as much awareness as possible, because I think initially, if people come to coaching or something like that, some kind of transformative intervention because they need to change their lives, it's because they're not aware of the kind of thing that you're talking about, which is, this inner information. What do I really need? What am I avoiding? What am I running from? What should I be running towards if I'm being real with myself? All that kind of stuff. When people resist those kind of things, it's like the Carl Jung quote, the famous Carl Jung quote. He said, "What you resist persists." And so the more that we run into a lack of awareness, because we're just running on autopilot and just doing all of the things that we become accustomed to doing, that are habitually kind of not allowing us to get the healing that we need and deserve, then our lives, they kind of just, they slip through our fingers, let's say, just for brevity. But it's something like Kundalini Yoga or any other intervention that raises awareness. Really, I guess what it ends up doing is it cuts through all of the hamster wheel thoughts and limiting beliefs and all that kind of stuff that we're running around filtering life through on a day-to-day basis. And it just puts us back on the path, if you want to use that term, on the path that, we need to be walking at a given moment if we want to move back towards wholeness and healing and all that kind of stuff. And so I guess the question for you is what kind of things have you seen that we need to become aware of in order to start healing our lives by going through this kind of process you're talking about, the Kundalini technology? But also, I suppose, just to open this up even more, what are the effects on the nervous system when we're not aware of that stuff? And is this why, yoga as a whole, I guess, is so powerful? Because it makes us aware of certain things that are aligning, this is me getting a bit weird maybe, but aligning our nervous system with our true path, if you want to call it that, or just the path of least resistance in our lives.
Yeah, the connections between yoga and psychology are one of the things that I find the most fascinating.
Yeah.
And when you do certain practices that create this sense of awareness, we can very often, start from that place of practicing postures and starting by feeling sensation in the body. Like, can I be aware of that feeling of stretch in my leg, right? So we kind of let awareness soak into the body. And then as you practice longer and you start to be able to draw your attention into some of your deeper layers and watch the thought processes unfolding and watch some of the habitual thinking patterns that we have that might be just kind of simmering under the surface, but they're pulling a lot of strings in terms of what we're choosing to do or not choosing to do. So the more we practice, over a lifetime, and we get these little spaces where we get to settle and turn that awareness in and say, okay, what process is unfolding as I go through my practice? And the particularly unique thing about Kundalini, as we switch from an effortful movement to a space of rest and complete stillness, we watch our relationship with effort and rest over and over and over. We are pushing ourselves into challenge. We're moving into a place of this feels uncomfortable, or I've been doing this for a while. My mind is bored, and the mind will be like, oh, I'd rather do something else. Why are we doing this? All these thoughts will start to come up. And it's very much like the meditative process in motion of, okay, noticing that thought, noticing that pattern, like, that's an interesting pattern. Why am I getting bored so easily? Why do I want to move on to the next shiny, exciting thing? What's going on there? So you get to observe your relationship with effort. And a very common pattern underneath that I know I have experienced, and I think a lot of other yoga people have experienced, is over-efforting, thinking that working harder is always better. And you push when you have those moments of effort. And I have injured myself doing that because I was not listening to my inner information. And I thought that I had to keep up, and I thought that I had to perform at the absolute maximum. So that was a huge learning experience for me and for a lot of other people, when you start to notice, well, I don't have to push myself to that point of strain. Why do I do that over and over? What's underneath that? And then there's the process that gets really interesting, because then you go into this moment of stillness and you go, okay, can I gently peek underneath that? Why did I think I needed to push myself so hard? And you start to get some insight into your relationship with yourself, with your self-worth, with, some of your core beliefs, if you really start to dig underneath there. So most students will start to notice a pattern kind of right off the bat of either leaning more toward the effortful movements, like loving the jumping around and moving your arms, or like kind of I'll call them the fun parts of Kundalini, where we really get to express ourselves through movement, and feeling like, oh yeah, I love effort. But then when you switch into stillness and you're like, oh, stillness, this is hard. I don't like just sitting here and being with what is. So you can notice points where resistance comes up, and you're working those two opposite ends of the spectrum. So it can become very apparent which one you gravitate toward and which one you tend to pull away from. And the process becomes, well, how does that show up in the rest of my life? Am I avoiding things that are uncomfortable in my life that could help me grow? Am I overworking myself, which many people, get into that place of like the hustle and over-efforting to the point where it becomes detrimental. You get to see how that expands to the rest of your life. And once you have that awareness and you start to notice the ripple effect that it has, that's an incredible shift that happens, because you'll notice it more easily. Once you're looking for it, you'll have that moment of recognition much more easily of, oh, I caught myself. I was overdoing. Can I try to find a new pattern, move into a space that's more supportive, and really listen to my inner information? What is that inner voice telling me? Is it gently telling me I actually need to rest right now instead of pushing as hard as I possibly can? So all of that is unfolding moment by moment within your practice, this constant evolution. And it's so interesting to watch that unfold and to see that strengthening of inner awareness, that like shining the light into some of the darker places where these very strong processes are always unfolding, but we did not have the knowledge that they were actually there until we started to settle in and look for them. But that's what I find endlessly interesting about this practice.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like everything that you just shared is so powerful, because ultimately those cycles of like effort and then release, effort and release, they're constantly unfolding in all areas of life anyway. And our relationship with those cycles affects the quality of our life. And I've seen so many times now exactly what you just talked about. Like there's so many people out there in the world. In fact, I used to be one of these people where, you know, we're human doings instead of human beings. So we're just constantly out there kind of forcing ourselves against life, trying to reach some kind of a goal or whatever it is, because we think that if we attain that goal, maybe it's a business goal or getting a certain relationship or whatever it is, we think if we attain that goal, then it's kind of going to be the panacea that solves all the problems in our lives. And we're finally going to feel emotionally healed and whole again. But ultimately, it doesn't work like that, does it? We need to fine-tune the relationship between effort and release, between the yang and the yin sides of life, so that we can express both in a healthy way. And when we get to that point, what I've found is that's when we can really learn to kind of lean into life, where we're doing everything that we can within the remit of our control and our power. But when it comes to the things that we can't control, then we can just let go. We can surrender and we can rest into allowing life to let things happen when they need to happen and all that kind of stuff. And the yoga mat, I really believe in my life, is just, it's a testing ground for living in that way. Like it's a microcosm for the macrocosm of life as a whole. And if you can kind of, I suppose, get to I call it the 0 point. If you can experience that 0 point where, you know, yin and yang are kind of coming together because you've managed to put in the effort where you can, but also to let go to the effortlessness that comes from surrendering to just life in general, whether it's, you know, gravity and just accepting the limitations of your body, or just understanding that we can't always control everything and force things, blah, blah, blah. If we can unify those two things, that's when life gets amazing, because we're not forcing our body and our mind and our nervous system to do things that it doesn't need to do. So maybe this is a good time again to bring in the nervous system stuff, because I think if people are out there really just trying to force life and be perfectionistic, and even with certain yoga poses, asana, not just accepting that we all have different, you know, skeletal structures and things like that. All of our bodies are different, and we can't all do every pose aesthetically to perfection, for example. If we keep forcing because we got some misplaced ideas that we need to be perfect because of underlying shame or whatever it is, then ultimately we do end up in a state of sympathetic dominance, because everything becomes a threat. And so the kind of practices, the kind of work you're talking about, it's almost, maybe, you know, I'm kind of making assumptions based on the kind of work that I do, but it's almost taking us to the point where our nervous system is more aligned with the way that just life works in general. But that also is going to allow us to kind of trust life more, which allows us to have a better relationship with life. Because ultimately, if we got if the parasympathetic nervous system is doing what it needs to do, we can be calm in the eye of the storm as life is kind of swirling around us, and we can trust that we can get where we need to be without having to be one of those people that's putting effort where we don't need to put it. So I've just ranted and raved at you. I apologize. But you know, how do you see all that stuff, especially the nervous system stuff?
Yeah, well, you know, this whole process, this play that, as you were saying, is really something that unfolds on our mat, but it is the bigger picture of our life with everything, with how do I play back and forth with effort and ease? How does my nervous system adapt to effort and ease? And, you know, there's a lot of kind of misconceptions in yoga that we're always supposed to be, you know, in quotes, calm and placid and just, you know, completely relaxed. And that's actually not the way that the human nervous system is designed. We are made to be incredibly adaptable so that when there is danger, we have that energy that mobilizes to help us address that situation. And then as soon as that danger is gone and that, you know, challenge has been handled, we can slide right back into that parasympathetic rest and digest, taking care of yourself, creating connection. So a truly healthy nervous system is fluid back and forth between those things all throughout the day. As some challenge arises, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in and goes, here's some extra energy, here's some extra glucose, like here's all the things that you need to meet this challenge. And then as soon as you're done with that, you go right back into rest and digest. But what happens is we get so much practice being overstimulated, overworked, that most people in the modern world tend to get stuck in that fight or flight, that stress response, in a way that becomes detrimental to our health. But it's not necessarily to say that that's always bad. It's actually a very natural and healthy part of our nervous system. It's only when we get stuck there that it becomes something detrimental. So this practice that we do in Kundalini of inviting in effort, of saying, okay, we're not going to do everything, always soft, always calm. We know that there is a range of experience within our nervous system, and being able to have that flexibility of adaptation. Whatever need arises, your nervous system is ready and able to meet that. That is a very healthy nervous system, just fluid back and forth between whatever the moment really calls for. So the practice of Kundalini comes and gives us a whole bunch of tools for what we call in the therapy world, nervous system regulation, of making that choice of, I feel that I am stuck in that tension. Like whatever happened during the week is still clinging to me. I still feel that tension, that, kind of upwelling of energy, and I really need to get ready to go to sleep or something like that. So, the thing that people actually don't realize about Kundalini sometimes is that there's a wealth of really deep meditative practices outside of like the fun jumping around and, energy and all that. We also have this wealth of, mantra and breath work and deep meditative practices that can also help your nervous system to calm and to settle. And one of my favorite components of that, as we practice back and forth and support that nervous system flexibility, when you get really good at making that choice of, do I want to use this breath or do I want to use that breath, depending on what I need to feed to my nervous system, it becomes this really dynamic relationship of how you take care of yourself. It's like a whole layer of self-care and personal empowerment to say, I have all these tools. I have an awareness of how I feel right now and kind of what's going on. And I know what I need to bring into my experience so that I can move into that place of feeling regulated, feeling supported. And within that process is strengthening that relationship to your inner information, being able to know that from a deep place within yourself. And that can be such an empowering process that I think is really key to the modern practice of any yoga, but particularly in Kundalini, that strong connection to listening to your inner information.
Do you think when people have a dysregulated nervous system, it's ultimately just causing them to receive information that seems like the kind of inner information you're talking about, but actually it's not a pure signal, so to speak. It's been distorted, or it's a consequence of kind of resistance at some level. And it just ends up kind of exacerbating the kind of problems that are causing them to feel stuck or blocked, or to feel like they needed some kind of emotional healing or release in the first place. And if so, like, I suppose, how do we distinguish, I guess, distorted inner information from the real thing, if that's not too deep?
Yeah. No, this is a very important process that I really like to work with people on, because, so if, anxiety and having a harsh inner critic is such a common experience for people in the modern world, very, very common. The people just have these patterns of self-talk and all of these different very loud sources of inner information that are telling them that they're not enough, that they're not doing enough, that they have to fix things or become better. So that's the really loud voice for so many people. And it's where the process of going in can sometimes feel scary because we don't want that inner critic to get louder. We don't want to sit there and listen to these judgmental, things going on in our head. I think that's where a lot of people are like, meditation, no thank you. Like, I don't want to sit there and just listen to my inner critic. That sounds terrible. And that's not what we want to happen. So one of the interesting things is that when we are chronically dysregulated, when we're stuck in that stress response, the inner critic will tend to get louder and stronger. It's a product of trying to protect yourself, trying to kind of put up your walls. That's a lot of what that process is. So the first step is doing some practices that help you to feel more centered, to feel more regulated, that flexibility of your nervous system, that adaptation. And a little bit toward the calming, quieting end, think of like the arc of a yoga practice. You warm up, you get to the peak where you really get to move and mobilize your energy, and then you slide down into that space of calm and quiet. And when you come to that end point of calmer and quieter, very often, if we've done a good job of regulating the nervous system through postures and through breath, we get to that place where there's a little bit more inner clarity, where the voice of the inner critic or some of the anxious information that might be loud and front and center has kind of dimmed down a bit. Or at the very least, even if it's still there, we have the perspective to understand that that is not wisdom. That is the voice of fear.
Yeah.
So it has a very different energetic feeling. When it is fear-based, that's when we know, just for like kind of a collective attribution, we'll say that that's the ego, protective and fear-based, this kind of collection of things. So you might notice that happening, and then you could say to yourself, okay, but if I settle down, I think of an image of like a leaf coming off of a tree and just ever so gently landing on the ground. If you go through that process internally and you go, okay, let me settle down past that active, loud place of information coming from fear, and I go down deeper. Do I feel anything? Do I hear anything or have an awareness of something that feels very calm and very clear? And it's usually like a soft whisper or just a gentle feeling, but there is a clarity to it that is unmatched by anything else.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think when I tell people that, they will immediately go, oh, that sounds wonderful. I want to make that happen, right? Like snap my fingers, like, yes, like how do I listen to my inner wisdom? Let's make that happen.
Yeah.
And it's important to realize that it's a process. Like we practice a lot. We do a lot of things to get to that place where we can root down into that deeper layer and listen to it. So, but that's where all the tools of the practice come in to get us there.
Yeah. Is this, a classic case of getting where we want to be in, 90% of cases, let's say, which is just a random number I've pulled out of thin air. But getting where we want to be, really, it's about unlearning rather than learning. And I think what we're talking about here is like all of these different levels of fragmentation that build up the ego. It's just stuff that we've picked up and kind of identified with and got used to because of the way our nervous system has been interacting with life. It's just been keeping us from what was already there all the time anyway, which is whatever is real about us. And for me, that realness is something that I'm obsessed with and I just end up talking about all the time. And it's the connection to wholeness or to truth or whatever you want to call it. And most of the healing work that is most effective is ultimately just giving us those tools to be able to distinguish or to discern what's real from what's not real. And when we can do that, that's when we really get to this place that you're helping people get to as well, by the sound of it, where all of that distortion, all of that noise is kind of just, they don't listen to it anymore because they know how to tune into the actual signal, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the pattern, that you've come across, that I've come across, and that I think a lot of people in the healing space and in the, just personal exploration space, when you sort through all the different fads and, things that are offered out there, it all boils down to that same process of connecting to that core of who you are really at your center. And that's where this very clear information comes from, that experience of wholeness. And as you were talking about, the process of unlearning, or some of the, maybe like the lies that we have internalized and taken to be truths, I think one of the most important things that we can learn from, especially meditation practice, is that not everything our brain says is true. When you hear that critical thought, when you have that harsh self-judgment, you can sit there and go, oh, okay, I see that thought there, but it's not true. It's just a thought. And that can be a process to get there, to unlearn that process of saying, well, if my brain said it, it must be true. But we can get to that place of going, no, our brain says all sorts of things all the time. And a lot of them are just random things that our brain is throwing out there, and they're not necessarily helpful or true. So, the more that you work with your practices, any practice of introspection, yoga, meditation, all of these things, it's showing you the path to find that experience of wholeness, that, this full package of being human. I don't have to fix it. I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to be awesome at asana or any of these things. All of the flaws, all of the realness comes together, and that's the full experience of being you. So that gets reflected over and over in so many different spiritual practices that I think we're pretty good at saying, okay, this is what we're working on. We have different paths to get there, but this is absolutely what we're working on, that core connection.
Yeah. And I suppose just one final question about that is, if you go back to the old, the yoga texts, the Yoga Sutras, and all the yoga stuff, that was written thousands of years ago. And it was, it's still applicable now. And I suppose human beings back then are exactly the same fundamentally as we are now. The only thing that's really changed is kind of, the technology that we have and the scenery of our lives. And maybe there's more complexity because, we've got the internet and all this kind of stuff. But what it means to be human is ultimately the same. And I think, do you think a lot of kind of modern interventions are, they try to find something new for whatever reason, but really we already have the information that we need to kind of embrace the human experience and to make the most of it. But we end up looking for all these new kind of technologies or new interventions or new spiritual esoteric answers and so on and so forth. But in a way, it really is just what you said, that it's about connecting to wholeness, accepting yourself and your flaws and all that kind of stuff, and accepting other people's, and then just working with it. Why do you think we need to keep looking for something else, I guess?
Well, one of the interesting things about our nervous system, and you can think about this in terms of habit, is our nervous system is designed to try to find the easiest path. It is a built-in process of energy savings. So our brain will always try to figure out, what's the fastest, easiest way that I can make this happen? That's the path that I want to take. And anyone who's been on a healing journey knows that it's usually the long and winding path that will bring the most discovery, usually the most arduous of the paths of really digging in there and figuring out things, not necessarily the easy path. But you got to give credit to our brain. It tries to find the quick answer. And wouldn't it be nice if that was true? But, you kind of come around to that realization of, I have to sit with the difficult things. I have to, really dig into some of these things as I feel safe, as I feel able, as I have that capacity in a way that is safe. But, understanding that process is an ongoing thing for the duration of our human experience. And, as you were saying, there are those deep, really core truths that were known thousands of years ago and put into these texts are still so important and so true. Some of the external details have changed because, we sit a lot more. Our hips are different. Our posture is different. Our nervous systems are exposed to very different inputs than they were back in the day. So our starting point is not quite the same. We have to do a little bit more prep work to re-regulate the nervous system, to reconnect with our body, to bring in some sense of connection and awareness. And then we can go through that process of starting to see a bit of clarity toward those deeper layers. And when you have that moment of realization of, connecting to that inner space and just knowing that it's there, even it's kind of like you connect to it and then you'll get distracted, just like anything. You'll connect to it, you'll get distracted. This is the dance, this is the process. But once you have had that first understanding of, this is the experience of my core, this is my center, knowing that that is there and that that is what is supporting you always is just such an incredible source of support and connection, no matter what challenge you are navigating. So if yoga can give us a little glimpse of that, it is so worth the time and effort that we put into our practice.
That was awesome. Well, I think what I've learned from this episode is that I'm just not going to trust my brain anymore. If you could sum all this up, if that is possible, I guess, what are your final words of wisdom based on everything that we said? And also, can you let people know, where they can learn more about you and, your work and everything?
Yeah, and I think, the broad picture of, especially the way that I personally want to share Kundalini and yoga as a whole with the world is to say, this practice gives you tools to take amazing care of yourself. There is no other practice that I have ever come across that has the diversity of tools and tools that are so incredibly good at taking care of your body, your energy, your nervous system, to help you to find tools to navigate your emotions. When you're going through the very real, very challenging experience of being human, we have this whole set of supportive processes that we can lean into that have been given to us. So that is yoga as a whole, and Kundalini has these really particular strengths where it gives us this strong output to process big emotions. It gives us a way of connecting to stillness and turning in and connecting to your inner information. Wow. And that being the core of the practice. Once you have that connection to your center, it is a constant guide through everything that you will navigate, and you always have that support with you. So this is what the practice gives us, and it is incredibly helpful whether you are somebody who can practice 2 hours a day, or even if you just have 15 minutes or 5 minutes to do a couple movements and do a couple breaths. It is still incredibly supportive and helpful for all these different layers and human complexity that we are navigating. So,
awesome. So where can people, what's your website? And is there anywhere where people can try some of your Kundalini flows and things like that?
Yeah. So my website is Laura G Yoga, and everything is Laura G Yoga. You can find me on Instagram at Laura G Yoga. And if you go on my website, lauragyoga.com, I have a bunch of resources on there. I just made an updated version of my free Kundalini 101, which is if you're new and you're kind of curious about what this practice is like and you want to learn about it and just try it so that you can feel it, so you can experience it for yourself, then you can try the Kundalini 101 class. And it really gives you a nice overview of what this practice has to offer you in your life. So those are the best places to get in touch with me and experience Kundalini.
Brilliant. Well, Laura, thank you so much for this. It's been awesome. I appreciate your time. And like I said, I'm going to go, get a lobotomy or something because I don't trust my brain anymore. But yeah, I appreciate this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ollie. I really appreciate this time to talk about Kundalini and share some of this information. Thank you.